Right, today is October 22nd, 2024. We are at the Community Media Center in Westminster, Maryland. My name is Steve Bowersox, and joining me today is Ralph Lydick. Thank you for being with us today and sharing your story of service.
You're welcome.
All right, so let's just start at the beginning. You know, everybody's got a story about why they go into the military, why they pick the branch of service. Sometimes it's circumstance. Kind of give us your background, Mr. Lydick.
Yeah, sure. My story is probably not unlike a lot of stories, but I joined the Navy when I was 19 years old. I'd been out of high school for about a year. It wasn't due to some sort of feeling of patriotism, I'll be honest with you, right? At the time, it was more, and my dad says, you got to go, right? And in retrospect, I look back on that, and it's probably the best advice the man ever gave me. And him and I did not get along. We clashed. Day I turned 18, he gave me the boot from the house, and I was still in high school. And I grew up in a small town, probably 50 miles or so outside of Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, and a family across the street was gracious enough to take me in until I could graduate. And then I bounced around from job to job, mostly manual labor, printing press, tomato canning factory, driving forklift, lens factory for a short period, and living in hotels, bar downstairs, rooms upstairs, just a room, community bathrooms, showers, etc. And after about a year, he allowed me to move back home, and it just didn't work out. So he's like, I think you need to join the service. And, and I did, right? So one, it is to have a place to go, right? Because he was getting ready to give me the boot again.
Right.
And like I said, in retrospect, it was great advice. So I was pushed into the Navy, and I love the Navy, right?
That's what I was going to ask you. You said it wasn't out of extreme patriotism, but you said you stayed in for 35 years?
Yeah, 35 years, 4 months, 3 days.
Okay, so
right?
Not everybody's counting.
So,
but, right.
Yeah,
so,
that's a DD-214, speaking. Right?
So something happened when you were in there that really gave you a love of the service.
Yes. So what I found out is, a couple of things. One, it gave me some focus, right? There's discipline, there's focus, and it wasn't always great, right? I mean, it was, there were some tough times, especially when you're a young enlisted guy, mm-hmm. right? But as I grew in the Navy and promoted, my attitude changed a little bit. What I'm doing, I'm a submariner, right, is important, right? My mind just clicked where, hey, what you're doing is important for this country, right?
Right.
So, I mean, red, white, and blue runs through my veins right now, right? So in some respects, I'm the same guy that joined the Navy in 1979, but I'm a different guy as well.
Gotcha.
So I, I met my wife in 1985 in Charleston, South Carolina, and her dad's a retired Air Force guy. He did 21 years, and I was getting ready to get out, in 85, mm-hmm. and she convinced me not to, and that was some, good advice from her, right?
Right.
Because I was, 35 years, a retirement check, medical, right? I mean, from that perspective, and you don't think about those things when you're 19. A 19-year-old kid, right?
Not at all.
But it's important stuff as you age, right? So, from that perspective, that was all good, and I'm glad I did it. But I didn't do it. I didn't do it for that, right? I did it. I grew into. I am doing this for my country, right? My early Navy days were on missile submarines, ballistic missile submarines, out of Charleston, South Carolina. And, we were a strategic deterrent, right, to war. And, we would go out and they would say 4 knots in nowhere, right? You're under in my case, the Atlantic Ocean, not going any place in particular, and you stay hidden, right, in case you're needed.
So, that would be the last place I could ever be on a submarine because I'm a little claustrophobic anyhow. How is it when you're down there and
For me, it's just like sitting here speaking with you, all right? It really is. I can't see as far. You cannot see as far as, the walls here, right? But that's what it is for me, all right? Now, I've only seen one guy. I have 20 plus deployments, on submarines, 25 overall, 5 on surface vessels. I've only seen one guy who kind of lost it underway.
Yeah.
And we had to get him off the boat, sedate him.
I would think.
And, go up and communicate to our bosses in Norfolk, Virginia. And they had us go get him off down near Bermuda area.
Okay.
But that's it, right? And
I'm thinking, with your background, you're growing up. Didn't sound like it was a really easy time growing up. So, and that basic training can be hard on a lot of people, but it sounds like you'd been through enough already that you just needed to kind of go along with what you were being asked to do and,
Yep. Yeah. So my dad now, he adopted us, so he wasn't my natural father. In fact, I was adopted twice in my life, right? Once at 2 weeks and once when I was 10.
Oh, wow.
All right.
Okay.
And he was a violent man. He was a drunkard. He was a violent man. He put my head through a couple walls when I was growing up, when I was a teenager. And I don't, how did that shape me? I'm sure it did in some manner, right? I am not a violent guy, right? Now, I can be a stern guy, right? I can be a disciplinarian, right? With my own 2 daughters,
Right.
Or with a sailor. But I'm not a violent guy like that. I don't lose my temper. So maybe that's how he shaped me, because I didn't want to be like him, right? Yeah.
So, where all in the world, there's probably some stuff you can't talk about here with what your missions were, but did you have a favorite, like once you got up and got on land anywhere, did you have a favorite place you like to go, or?
Like on those missile submarines, you don't pull into a lot of different places, right? You go out, for, 60 or 70 days and you're under the water. Halifax, Nova Scotia, as they say, is a good Liberty port.
Okay.
Right? I've been there a couple times. Tromsø, Norway, been up there
nice. Okay.
several times. And that's good Liberty. It was always the winter time, so there was always a lot of snow. And it was dark, a lot of the time too, right? The winter time. Those are probably my favorite places. I've been to Singapore, and that was interesting. Been to Germany, and it was interesting. It was a little bit of a communication barrier over there. Norway was easy, because everybody spoke English.
Okay.
For the most part, right? The older folks struggled with the English a little bit, but younger folks did not.
All right, and then you said you spent some time on a non-submarine vessel. What were you doing then?
Yeah, so I when I was at about 14 and a half years in the Navy, I gained a commission, right, as an officer. And I was a chief petty officer, so an E7, which I had put on in 1987. So after I got commissioned, I went to a submarine tender. It's a surface ship in San Diego, California. And they work on submarines.
Okay.
Right? So they're the maintenance facility that works on the fast attack submarines, right? 2 classes of submarines, the missile ones and then the hunter-killer type ones, right? And so I did that. And then my last tour was on a civilian operated ship. We had a contingent of Navy on board, and that's really all I'll say about that. We did some special stuff
All right. Some things we can't
in
talk
Southern
about.
California.
Right. Do you have relationships with people you met in the Navy that you still hold on to?
I do, right? So, and I talked about when I retired. Navy does a retirement ceremony if you wanted a big one, right? And I had a big one in Southern California, Fort Hueneme. And what I talked about there is what I'll tell you here is the Navy became my family, right? It really did.
Gave you something that sounds like you didn't really have.
I
right?
didn't really have it, right? And growing up, so the Navy became my de facto family, and I miss it, right? I do, but I do. I'm still in contact with some very close friends from my first submarine.
Okay.
More so. It's interesting. More so from my first submarine than my second submarine, which was first one was Von Steuben, and the second one was Stonewall Jackson.
Were most of the people in that first submarine with you also? This was their first time out, also. So
Yeah,
you guys had
we
something in
were
common
young.
there? Yeah.
We probably socialized a little bit more, So and then in my second submarine, where I was a chief, kind of the guy in charge of a group of people, you're kind of
pulled back.
Pulled back a little bit
Right.
from doing that, right? And but there is probably at least one off that submarine, but there's a handful off the Von Steuben, my first submarine, that, through Facebook.
Oh,
really,
I got
right?
you. So did a lot of those guys also, I don't know, have similar experience, but came in and they stayed, or you have some that came in and left?
None of them stayed as long as I stayed.
Okay.
Right? I mean, some of them did 20-year careers.
Okay.
Some of them did not. Right? They did their duty, and then they got out. Right? And I'm glad they did. And then Navy, staying for 35 years like I did, 35 plus, it's never my intention. It really wasn't. But as I promoted, I was still having a good time, right? And I hope I was making a difference, not only for the security of this country, but for the sailors that worked for me. So I retired as an 05 commander. And I had an impact over a lot of sailors' lives.
Did you, I don't know, maybe notice that coming in as an enlisted person,
Yeah.
you've got a whole different perspective once you achieve higher rank. Do you think you were more sympathetic to those guys, or more understanding of what they were going through?
I would say understanding, right? Haven't been there, right? A lot of times, if you haven't walked in their shoes, you don't understand them, right? And what they're going through, right?
Right.
So that gave me a better perspective, and shaped my leadership style, really. I was probably a little harder on more senior guys than I was the junior folks, right? And, because they're really just, no one gets up in the morning and says, I'm going to go screw something up, right? Or, or whatever it is, right? They're just really looking for some direction and some focus, right? And that's what I hope that I brought to a lot of the young sailors and the more senior guys too, right?
And I would think, just having spent a couple years in the Army and met some people, that there were people on your ships who had probably had similar experiences as you had as a young man before you went in. And I think having gone through that, you were probably a really good leader, or someone for them to come to talk to, or to lean on, I guess, whatever the words you want to use.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's the Navy, the Army, the services. They come from a diverse group of people, right? From all over the country, and everybody has a story. They really do. Some of the stories are really good. Some of them are really bad, right? Mine's probably is bad, but it's probably not the worst, right? So I could relate to them, right? I'll also tell you that marriages were a little tough, right?
You're away a lot.
Yes, I've got a lot of sea time, and I'm on my second marriage, right? The first one didn't go very well.
Right.
And that happens a lot, So when that happens to my sailors, I could relate to that, right? And I could help guide them or mentor them through that, because it's very, especially for a young guy or even a gal, it's very traumatic, right?
Right.
Going through something like that.
All right.
And I had a really good chief, when I went through it, that helped me out, because she put me in a lot of debt while I was deployed, and he helped me with my creditors, coming up with payment plans and
Right.
stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more than just being the military commander. It's
Yes.
there's so many other facets in there
Yeah.
when you're with people all the time
Yeah.
like that. So, looking back, no regrets over going in, obviously.
No.
And you would recommend this to young people out there, maybe searching for a way, or
100%. 100%. Again, it's not for everyone, but I would say that if you're looking for something and you don't quite know what it is yet, right? Why not? Right? Why not, join the service? Doesn't have to be the Navy. Could be the Army or Coast Guard or Air Force, right? Marines. And try it out, right? The side benefit is you get benefits, right? VA, the GI Bill, right?
Right.
Educational bill, stuff like that. Home loan, the VA home loan
Right,
program,
sure.
right? And which I've bought a couple homes, including the one I'm living here in New Windsor, right? Through the GI Bill.
Okay.
Right? So those are all side benefits, right? But I think the most important benefit is the focus that it gives you, that's going to carry you through the rest of your life, right? I think that to me is really the most important thing.
right.
Right?
So how'd you, if you grew up outside of Philadelphia, how'd you end up outside of New Windsor?
Yeah, good question. So I work for a company called Oceaneering.
Okay.
And
And this is what
Oceaneering,
you've since you've retired, you've
Yeah.
begun working for this
yeah,
business.
I retired in 2015. I was still on active duty, and I was on what they call terminal leave, and I went to work for a company called Oceaneering in Hanover, Maryland. My wife and I, we have horses, so we were looking for some horse property, if you will,
Space.
right? And I found this place in New Windsor. I was down at the Pentagon in December of 2014, given a brief, from my last deployment. And my wife called me, she says, hey, go take a look at this place. My house is exactly 60 miles from the Pentagon, right? So I drove up here and I looked at it and with a realtor, and we videotaped it and for my wife, because she was still out in Southern California. And I said, yeah, this might work for us, right? It had a barn on it. It was fenced.
Yeah.
And so that's, and I drove it from here to Hanover, Maryland, about 43 miles. So I said, I think I could do that, right? Well, there's a lot of traffic out there at times, right? So, but it's not too bad. I've become used to it. So that's really how, we came to the New Windsor area.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what you do now with this company. What's this company's focus?
Yeah,
and-
so Oceaneering, big Oceaneering out of Houston, Texas, is in the oil fields, right? Doing work with underwater vehicles, working on pipelines and stuff like that. My unit works for the government. We're a government contractor, so we build underwater vehicles for the Navy, right? Some of them
like
are
a perfect transition.
it was a
For you,
perfect
right?
transition. In the Navy, I was an end user of some of their products. A guy I worked for twice in the Navy is as a vice president, there. And in 2013, I was deployed on this surface ship where we had internet connectivity, which was nice because in a submarine you don't have it.
Right.
He goes, hey, send me a resume, and I did, right, and they hired me. So we build these vehicles for the Navy, and some of them come out of torpedo tubes, some of them are launched off the back of a ship, right? And some have arms that they can go down and do some work on the seafloor, and some, look like mini torpedoes, right? Unmanned vehicles, basically. So yeah, that's what that company does. That's what I do, right? And it was a different, perspective being on the end user side of it. Now I'm on the designing and building
right.
side, right? Now I'm not an engineer, but I sent with some really smart engineers that I work with, right?
Right.
But what I give them is the operator's perspective, is that, hey, this is what it needs to do, and let's make it sailor friendly, easy
Right.
to work on
Right.
while they're deployed, right? Because the missions and deployments are already tough, right? So let's not make it too complex, right? Although complexity increases what you can charge the government, right?
Right.
But I'm not all about that. I'm about doing the job and keeping the sailors happy, if you will. Yeah.
So, I mean, the sea has been your life. I mean, and it's still water.
Yeah.
Did you, when you were younger, were you, I mean, I don't, swimming or any of that kind of stuff?
No,
Nothing.
some of my earliest memories are, my dad was my first dad, right? Was from Smyrna, Delaware, and he had a wooden hull boat, and we used to go out crabbing, right? And I couldn't tell you what body of water is, but I have memories of him tossing us overboard, so we can swim. We had life preservers on and stuff like that, but it scared the heck out of me. I'm not a strong swimmer, right? I mean, I'm not. And we used to go deep sea fishing out of Cape May, New Jersey, right? And I used to think, man, I'd like to work on one of these boats, right? And be a first mate or whatever they're called. But yeah, that was my only exposure to the sea.
Interesting. It seems to have worked out for you.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's.
Do you have anything you want to leave us with about your service? Actually, any close calls while you're out there, like mechanical issues on submarines when you're underwater? Or?
Yeah, well, we had some that I won't discuss in detail, but I mean, it's a dangerous environment, right? It's a harsh environment. Close calls, another vessel coming close to you while you're submerged, right?
Right.
That has happened, right? Because I won't go into too much details on the physics, but there's layers in the ocean, and sometimes these layers you can't hear through them, right? Until you're really close to something, right? And then their sound, everything in the water puts sound waves into the water, right? Rotating machinery, etc., right? So we've had some things where, hey, this is a little closer than what we would like, right? Never any danger of us running into it, but just something that would get your attention, like, hey, we need to be extra special care, when we're going to periscope depth or something like that, because you're coming from a deeper depth to a shallower depth, put that scope up. I've known people that have been on vessels that have hit things.
Oh.
Yeah, and sea mounts, another submarine, right? That's bad, right?
I'm sure.
Fortunately, I've never had to, go through something like that.
All right. So as we wrap this up, anything you want to say here? At the
Yeah,
end
I would say, again, you told me a little bit about what the audience is, and I would just say to somebody who is a teenager, is take a look at the service, right? If you don't want to go to college, college is not for everyone. I didn't go to college, right? I have 0 college degree, right? And I've got a lot of college credits, right? But I've never put it all together to, into that degree,
right?
For whatever reason. But if they want to go try something, right? Go try service, try the Navy. I love the Navy. If I was, I'm 64 years old. If I was, a youngster again, I would do it all over again. And then, you're going to do something really important for this country. That might not be your motivator, and that's okay, right? But you're gonna make some lifelong friends, right? I think that's good.
Right.
And you're gonna learn some stuff, right? That's gonna carry you through the rest of your life.
Even if it's not spent in the military.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Absolutely.
thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Thanks again, Mr. Ralph Lydick, for sharing your memories with us today.
Sure. You're
Appreciate it.
welcome. Yep.